All right, so this knife thoughts video is going to be on this knife, or rather the knife that would be in this package, the Ryder Reserve RRR008 common stock. So first of all, let's take a look at the packaging. It comes in a box. This box was coming apart here. I've actually had that happen on other Ryder Reserves that I've seen. I think that the glue comes undone. So it comes in a box, and then in the box, there is a tube. So the tube is actually a metal tube, unlike a certain other company. But it is like that company in the sense that you don't see a whole lot of knives that come in tubes. So certainly probably inspired by GEC and built by hand, backed for life, Rough Rider RRR Reserve. Then inside the tube, it comes in a microfiber cloth that is wrapped. In that is branded wax paper. Then in that is the knife. But I was carrying the knife, so I had it out, didn't feel like putting it in there, and then taking it all the way out again. So here it is. This is the Ryder Reserve RRR008 common stock. So this is a large stockman knife, but with some adjustments from your typical traditional stockman. So it has a large main blade, which is a pretty classic traditional clip point. Then it has a sheep foot secondary, pretty stubby sheep foot as they go, but definitely a pretty classic sheep foot also. And finally, it has a bottle opener screwdriver. So that's where it gets a little different than most common or the most traditional version of a stockman, which would have a spay blade. So this is a Rough Rider VG10 small, or actually medium stockman. And you see it has that clip point for the main blade, and then a sheep foot, but instead of the bottle opener, it has a spay blade. And I like the addition of the bottle opener quite a bit because I don't really have a huge use for that spay blade. I do really like having a blade with some belly to it and a point, which a really great example of that is a clip point, as the main blade on a multi-bladed knife. And then the secondary blade, I usually prefer to be a straight edge knife like a sheep foot, because that gives you a really good mix of cutting ability. You get the usable tip of the clip point or whatever other main blade, a spear point maybe, and then the belly, which allows you to do some type rolling cuts, things like that, push cuts. And then on the smaller secondary, being a straight edge knife, you can do really good pull cuts like cutting cardboard and things like that. So I do like that, but I usually don't really have a huge need for a second knife with even more belly to it, another secondary blade with even more belly to it. So I like that they added the bottle opener and pry bar or screwdriver. I guess I actually have used it as a pry bar, but you want to hold on to the tool itself rather than the handle so that you don't get blade play. But I like that addition, and it is something that other companies have done. So for example, Case makes some stockman knives with a bottle opener rather than the spay blade. So it's not completely brand new. It's not a novel idea, but it is a little bit less traditional. Now, as for the design of this knife, I think it looks really good. I think that this black canvas micarta is what they say that this is. Black canvas micarta with nickel silver RRR arrowhead shield and then nickel silver bolsters. I think that it looks really good. It's a very classy black, and you can see some of the lines of the layers of micarta in there, which I think gives it a nice look. It also has threaded bolsters, which again, you know, kind of classes it up a little bit. The blades have some swedging. You can see some really drawn swedges on that main clip point, and then some drawn swedges on the sheep foot also. And it has pins that are flush with the handles, so that gives it a traditional and again classy look. And it is well put together generally, so no gaps. And I saw a few of these when I was at Smoky Mountain Knife Works, and I don't recall any of them having gaps. The fit between the covers and the bolsters is really good, as well as with the shield. And the blades are centered well. You can see that the main blade is very well centered. The other two fit together pretty well. No rub really or anything. So well put together in general. Now, I actually had a different version of this previously. So when I was at Smoky Mountain Knife Works, I purchased one. I didn't really look at it a whole lot, which I've got a whole video on why that is, but I didn't really look at it super closely. And when I got home and opened it, I realized that the pin had cracks. So there were cracks at the pins here, and I will include a picture of those as well. And I decided, even though it wasn't a huge deal, wasn't really happy with it, so I did send it in, and they sent this as a replacement. So good service, good warranty from Smoky Mountain Knife Works and Rough Ryder, as I've experienced before. But this one does not have cracks at the pins, although it does have two things that I saw on all of the other ones that I looked at. And that is, first, a slightly rounded tip on this main blade. Now, I don't know how well you'll be able to see that or how well I'll get it to focus. It was close to focusing there. But the very tip is rounded there. So not a huge deal. Certainly after a sharpening, it will, you know, get a little pointier. But I did see that on most of them, you know, a little bit of a rounded tip on that main blade. And then the second thing is the nail nick, which these are all match strike nail nicks, which Rough Ryder does a lot, as again you can see on this Stockman. The nail nicks on the bottle openers, that on all of the knives that I saw, were considerably shallower than the nail nicks on the other blades. And so what that means is, if you look there at the nail nick on the sheep foot, it's pretty deep. It's easy to get your nail in there and open it up. But on the bottle opener, it is significantly less deep. And you can certainly open it, as you can see, if you get your thumb kind of pointed upwards. So see how my thumb is pointing towards it? Kind of hard. If I turn my thumb up, I can open it relatively easily. But it is more shallow, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. I'm not sure if it's part of the grinding process or, you know, why, but I did see that on, I believe, all of the knives, all of the common stocks that I looked at. Now, neither of those things are huge issues at all, like I said. This knife is still a relatively, compared to some other knives like GEC and Case, budget-friendly knife. Now, this common stock, being a bigger knife and a 3-blade knife, was $60. That is significantly more than even something like this from Rough Ryder that's not the Rough Ryder Reserve. This knife is, I believe, in the $20, $25 range, even with the VG10 steel. And the reason for that is because of the difference in construction quality, and also in the materials. Normally Rough Ryders, like this knife, have, you know, kind of plain handles and 440C or 440A sometimes, most of the time actually steel, just basically 440. And the Rough Ryder Reserve is definitely an upgrade in materials over that. With the micarta, they've all been micarta so far, and the D2 steel on all of the blades, which you can see it says there. So I do really like D2 steel, and I do like micarta, and I think that it is definitely an upgrade in materials, and certainly an upgrade in quality construction also. You can see that this knife, you know, has some gaps, probably a little less well-centered, as you can see this blade is, and it's, you know, chipping off and stuff like that. So the Rough Ryder Reserve knives are built better. The other thing here that I really want to point out on these Rough Ryder Reserves, and specifically on this second run, so they did the first 4, now they're doing the second 4, these have stop pins. So a lot of people complained about blade wrap on the previous run of knives. I saw, I believe, 2 of them. I have the Rough Ryder Reserve RRR008, which was the first one that came out. Mine did not have any blade wrap, but I saw people complaining about theirs having blade wrap. And so they put these pins in to mitigate that. And it pretty much is going to mean that you're not going to have blade wrap because the blade cannot over travel as it would if the kick was hitting the backspring when it hits that pin. So that's a really good inclusion, and I think it is a significant upgrade over normal Rough Ryder knives. One thing I would love to see on these Rough Ryder Reserves, speaking of pins, is the shields being pinned. And they are not currently pinned, they are just glued in. And I know most people don't consider it to be a big deal, but I just think that it's a sign of quality and would really love to see that. I don't expect to see it, but I would love to see it. And so speaking of the value of this knife, I think that it's a pretty good value. You get a really nice knife, even with those, you know, small issues that this one has. It's a pretty nice knife, and I'm going to show you some comparisons. So, you know, everybody kind of wants to compare GEC and the Rough Ryder Reserve, and I just don't think that it's quite fair. I don't think that it's the same thing. I mean, these are relatively limited, but GEC knives are much more limited. GEC knives are produced differently. They're produced in the USA, very different. But here is a GEC Stockman, and in quality, I do think the GEC wins pretty handily. There are no gaps at all on the GEC, really well fitted, really great centering. Also, the action is a little smoother, even though the Rough Ryder Reserve has washers, which it probably will smooth out, but I do think that GEC is not really a fair comparison. But they are certainly, I would say, higher quality, and people are going to get mad at me about this for sure, but in my experience, the Rough Ryder Reserve knives are higher quality than case knives. So I haven't had nearly as many case knives as GEC knives. I probably have 7 of them right now, something like that. But I have often experienced gaps on the back springs on case knives, proud tips, and or blade wrap, and I just don't think that they really have the construction quality, at least the ones that I've gotten, which I don't get any of the higher end case knives, but at least the ones I've gotten, compared to the Rough Ryder Reserve knives I've seen, I think the Rough Ryder Reserve knives have been better built. So again, I think some people will be mad at me about that, but it is what it is. It's my experience so far, even with the small issues that this knife has. So in my opinion, I think that these Rough Ryder Reserve knives are somewhere between the normal Rough Ryder knives and GEC knives. They are definitely better than the normal Rough Ryder knives. They are definitely not as good as GEC knives. Where do they fall in relation to case? In my experience, they've been better, but I think it kind of depends on what case knives you're getting and your taste in knives also. These Rough Ryder Reserve knives have so far been usually not 100% traditional, something like the addition of the bottle opener over the spay blade, or the bar back tool, which was very, very non-traditional, or the kayak, which was like a canoe but modernized. So it might be a taste thing that might push you away from these. But for me, I think that they're pretty cool. I'm happy with this knife. I have been carrying it the last few days, using it, and I have enjoyed it. Now, speaking of carrying, it is a really big knife. So again, I'll show you a couple traditional knives here. A case, full-size trapper, and then there was the 82 from GEC, but GEC is number 15. You can see that the Rough Ryder Reserve is a good bit bigger than the case. It is thicker by a good bit and longer, and definitely a lot bigger than the 15. Then I'm going to show you also a couple modern knives. So here is a Benchmade full-size Griptilian. You can see it is longer, but it's pretty close. Here is a Spyderco Endura, definitely longer, but I actually think that the common stock is a good bit thicker. And then here is a Ontario Rat 1, definitely longer, but pretty close for a traditional knife. And the Rough Ryder Reserve is thicker. So it is a large knife. I've carried it in my back pocket and I feel that it's there. I definitely know that it's there. So something to be aware of, that it is a very large knife. The other knives in this run, in this kind of set that they're doing, are not as big, but there are different, knives available. If you are interested in a Rough Ryder Reserve but would like something that's not quite as big and thick as this knife. But like I said, I have enjoyed it. I'm glad to have gotten one without the cracks like the first one I had. I'm sure that that blunt tip will sharpen to be a little bit pointier as soon as I sharpen the knife. Haven't needed to yet. I have stropped it, but I haven't needed to actually sharpen it. And the shallow nail nick here on the bottle opener is just something where you have to make sure you get good purchase on it. The bottle opener has worked fine. It's a pretty classic looking bottle opener and screwdriver combination. Haven't really used the screwdriver as a screwdriver, but like I said, I have pried with a little bit and it has worked well for that. So I think that the Rough Ryder Reserve line of knives is a cool thing that they're doing, and I'm looking forward to the next batch after this one. I do think that this is the only knife in this batch that I'm going to get, but they do have some cool ones. There's an elephant toe type knife with a big Wharncliffe blade that looks really interesting. They have a lockback, actually the first Rough Ryder Reserve lockback, and then also kind of a cool knife with a clip point and then a long Wharncliffe on the other end. So if you're interested in the Rough Ryder Reserve, check those out. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, you can like it. You can also subscribe to my channel and click the bell so you get notifications when I post new videos. And check out my social media, Facebook, Instagram, @Knife Thoughts, and my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife-related topics. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.